trauma is not just something that happened in the past. It's something that actually rewires your brain and your nervous system such that you're bringing the past into the present. The data also shows that it is pervasive, right? That 70% of adults in America have been through at least one significant traumatic event. And when these things happen in our childhood, higher adverse childhood event scores are directly correlated with our health outcomes, with increased likelihood of stroke, heart disease, diabetes. Someone who experiences multiple adverse childhood events are up to 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. So these things, the data just shows how there is a direct correlation, not just with our mental health, but also with our physical health outcomes. And I think the key thing is that when we go back and process and revisit those memories, that we're able to do that in a safe way. And that's often through why I think therapy is really important, or coaching. I really think having a human with you is so critical in the healing process.
Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. Every week we get a chance to interview and talk to Asian ceiling breakers, change makers, and a few troublemakers, but rarely do I come across a story that touches me at such a deep level. So today's guest, we are talking to somebody who has not only created some incredible change and really literally saving millions of lives. I know we talk about saving lives, but literally saving over 1 million lives through her company, but has also presented technology and been recognized by President Obama. Support from Beyonce, has served young global leaders by the World Economic Forum, named Social Entrepreneur of the Year by WEF. The accomplishments of today's guest go on for quite a while. But really what I'm most excited to talk about is the story of how she came to this point and all the struggles and the careers that have kind of, let's say, shaped her own story, especially from her family. There is not much that today's guest can't really talk about in this incredible journey of healing trauma. And I'm so excited to dive in. So today we're going to chat with Jane Chen, the author of an upcoming memoir called Like a Wave We Break. In the story, she dives deeply into all the challenges of not just growing up in a highly stress-filled environment, but also how she overcame all of her challenges and trauma to create something so beautiful. Thank you for being here with us, Jane.
Oh, thank you for having me, John.
All right. So I want to dive into this book because as soon as I pick it up, I heard about it through a mutual friend. And as soon as I picked it up, I'm like, this is going to change so many lives. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write this book?
Sure. Well, to tell that story, I'd probably have to go back to the story of starting my company. So I can start kind of at the beginning there. So in 2008, when I was a graduate school student at Stanford, I took a course that changed my life. It was all about creating low-cost technologies for people living on less than $1 a day. So I teamed up with a group of graduate students, and the challenge posed to us was to build a baby incubator that cost 1% of a traditional incubator, which in the US at that time was about $20,000. And as we did research, what we discovered was that many families in remote parts of the world don't have access to traditional healthcare, don't even have access to reliable electricity. And so what we created looks nothing like an incubator. It looks like a little sleeping bag for a baby. The core technology is based off what's called a phase change material. So it's a wax-like substance that when heated maintains a constant temperature of 98 degrees for 6 hours at a stretch and can be reheated multiple times. And so this is a technology that's low cost, portable, works without electricity, and can be deployed in very remote parts of the world. So with that idea, we formed a company, and I moved to India for the next 4 years. India is home to 40% of all the world's premature babies. And we did the manufacturing out there, the clinical testing, started distributing the product. We'll talk later, I'm sure, into all the challenges of that. But 16 years later, as of today, that technology's helped over 1 million babies around the world. So that is kind of the story of Embrace. Now, my personal story and the story of the memoir starts 10 years into that journey of Embrace, when we had faced some insurmountable challenges and had to shut our doors, or I thought we had to shut our doors at that point. And I just felt so broken that I decided to go on a healing journey. I packed up a suitcase, a surfboard, and bought a one-way ticket to Indonesia. And there I started this quest. I started exploring every healing modality that I could find. And really, through that process, was brought face to face with my upbringing. I'd
Mm,
grown up with physical violence in my upbringing. My father was quite violent, and I would get beaten up if I didn't meet his expectations or made mistakes. And for so many years, I just like swept that under the rug. I think corporal punishment is often very normalized in Asian culture, right?
mhm,
But through this process, I started to understand that it was feeling so powerless through my childhood. That's what motivated me to want to help the most powerless people in the world. And that had a shadow side. And the shadow side was that it consumed me. It really led me to total burnout, to working in very unhealthy ways for my mental health. And at the end of that 10-year period, I really had a mental breakdown.
mm,
And so coming out of that and trying these healing modalities, learning what I learned about trauma and healing, I decided I wanted to share the story. I wanted to share my path towards finding self-compassion and forgiveness, and I wanted to do that to hold a light to anyone who has been on a similar journey or who has struggled with similar things. So
mhm.
that's what compelled me to write this book.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Then that sounds really challenging. There's definitely a lot of elements in there that I want to kind of dive deeper into, especially around the part about parenting and upbringing.
Mm.
I mean, at this point, you've accomplished so much. Like your work has literally saved over 1 million lives physically. And
Mm.
in a lot of ways, I mean, we could take a look at the hard work that goes into it. It sounds like there's part of that that you recognize there's almost was a result of a very violent and abusive, if I can use the A word, upbringing. The first question I want to dive into, because I think that so many people, I mean, myself included, I'm Taiwanese. I know of
Mm.
families who have gone through extreme and very horrible abuses to their children in the way that they're brought up. And it's oftentimes kind of labeled as I'm doing this because one day you'll succeed. I'm
Yeah.
doing this out of love.
Yeah.
So you've succeeded in a lot of ways. I'm curious, is there a part of you that looks back on this and if there isn't, it's totally fine. But I'm curious, is there a part of you that looks back on how you were brought up with a recognition or even kind of like, oh, I'm glad I go through this. It sounds horrible.
No,
Nobody,
no,
of course, could
it's
be
a
glad.
great question.
But
It
do
is
you see where I'm
a
going
great
with this?
question. Yeah, and people have asked me this, like, does adversity lead to extraordinary things, right? So I think it's a
Hmm.
really, really important question. And here's what I would say. I think, the book is not kind of a commentary on parenting, although I do not believe personally in corporal punishment. I think
Hmm.
what is the most important thing is intentional parenting, right?
Hmm.
That things aren't happening out of reaction. And I think that's what was happening in my home, that there were moments that I was getting punished for things I didn't understand, right?
Hmm.
That my father would get angry. And one of the incidents I talk about in the book that was actually really a defining moment for me was being 12 years old. I came home from school one day and I read my history book on the front lawn. It was just a beautiful sunny day. So my friend and I decided to read our history books on the lawn. And when my father came home and saw this, he just flipped and he decided homework shouldn't be done on a lawn, it should be done at a desk.
Hmm.
Now, I think a perhaps more appropriate response to this would have been to explain to a young child why that might be the case, let them know your preference, do that in a loving way. But instead, I was beaten up for that. And being 12, it was the first time that I knew that I had done nothing wrong. Right. And so that really instilled that sense of like complete powerlessness in me that I knew I had done nothing wrong and I was getting beaten for it. And so it was the first time I
Hmm.
actually stood up for myself and I refused to apologize. But it was moments like that, I think, that become very damaging for a child because when you can't make sense of a parent's actions, you believe that you are the problem, that there's something wrong with you. And so my whole life, I never felt like I was enough, and it didn't matter even in my adulthood how many degrees I got or accolades or babies I saved. And what I was doing was so heart driven, it was so mission driven. And at the same time, it just never felt like I was enough. And I think that's what led me to work in such unhealthy ways. So I think yes, I think there is something great about driving kids to be successful, right? And even like the discipline to do that. But I think again, when it happens in these ways that are reactive as a parent, that is what's very damaging for a child. And what I explained in the book and what I came to understand about the science of trauma. And look, trauma is this like funny word. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. They're like allergic to that word. But I really came to understand like the science of trauma through reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score. What I It's so good. It really, oh my gosh, I wept, John, as I read that. It's an academic book, and I just wept as I read it because I understood for the first time what I'd been through. And what the book explains is trauma is not just something that happened in the past. It's something that actually rewires your brain and your nervous system such that you're bringing the past into the present, right? And so to me, that explained why I was often like very hyper vigilant, right? That we have kind of this enhanced fight or flight response when we go through experiences like that. Um, the data also shows that it is pervasive, right? That 70% of adults in America have been through at least one significant traumatic event. And when these things happen in our childhood, higher adverse childhood event scores are directly correlated with our health outcomes, with increased likelihood of stroke, heart disease, diabetes. Someone who experiences multiple adverse childhood events are up to 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. So these things, the data just shows how there is a direct correlation, not just with our mental health, but also with our physical health outcomes.
Mm, absolutely. Um, what you're referring to, ACE or adverse childhood experiences, includes everything from physical abuse, being physically hit, emotional abuse, humiliation, threats, or insults,
Mhm.
neglect, including lack of neglect or emotional neglect. These are a lot of things that we often don't realize how common they are and how, I would say, um, low heat they can come off. As in
Yes.
things that we really don't. And a lot of times when we talk about these experiences, people kind of go, "Oh, I don't think I've ever had any abuse." It took me a long time to be able to use the A word
Right.
in my own healing
Yeah.
journey. I literally, the first time my I remember I was sitting in a therapist's office and my therapist used the word abuse. I felt so
Mhm.
disgusted by
Yeah.
that word because I was like, what my parents did was not abuse. It was
Yeah.
love. It was
Yeah.
not easy, but it wasn't abuse. And it wasn't until later on I come back to realize that something could be both love and create an
Mhm.
adverse effect at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is, that is so hard to talk about.
Mhm.
The way I kind of frame it now is that those experiences often give us superpowers that have costs that are higher than the superpowers, and that the superpowers were always
Mhm.
with us
Yeah.
regardless. In other words, a lot of times we associate, oh,
Right.
it's because I went through this
Yes.
adversity that now I have these things, like what you talk about, hypervigilance. But truthfully, they would have been there without the cost that it brought. So, with
Yeah. Yeah.
that
And
question in
thank
mind
you
of
for saying
cost,
that.
when you
Oh, yeah. Go
no,
ahead. No, thank you for saying that because it took
no, no,
me
please continue.
until, yeah, it took me until my probably mid to late 30s to also acknowledge that what had happened in my home was abuse. And I still to
Hmm.
this day feel uncomfortable using that word. Because my parents also
Hmm.
loved me, right? And it wasn't just
Yeah.
abusive. There are plenty of things that my father did were incredibly loving as well. Right. And so it's
Hmm.
confusing. It's very confusing. And I remember talking to my sister, and this is in the book. I remember coming out of a retreat, having this realization, calling my sister and saying, Joyce, what we went through was abuse. And she said to
Hmm.
me, no, it wasn't. Our parents never meant to hurt us. They loved us, right? And so it took years for us to acknowledge that. And it was because a teacher of mine, a mentor, said to me, until you acknowledge the severity of what happened, you cannot appropriately address it. And so
Mm,
she said to me, this is not about blaming. This is about
mm,
acknowledging so that you can heal. And I really
mhm.
want to stress that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about there's no blame.
Yeah.
This is something I constantly come back to is that there is no blame, no matter what you're talking about, even if you're talking about these worst things. The goal is not to blame the parents, but to
Yep.
realize how we carry their voice still within us, how we
Exactly.
carry those habits still within us. And then the question is, how do we now shift out of the ones that no longer serve us?
Exactly.
Um, Take us back to the moment that you had this incredible success with your with Embrace, right? You have you were a TED speaker, young global leader. Your work was being recognized all over the world. By every metric, this was a high point. How did you then decide, I'm going to put all that aside and then go off to Indonesia of all places to start this like journey? That couldn't have been a light or easy, like, I'm just going to go on vacation decision. That must have been deep, right?
No. Yeah, no, this was so over the years with Embrace. I mean, what we were attempting to do was so challenging on so many levels, right? We were trying to get this product to some of the most challenging places in the world. And a big part of that was like, what was the right business model to do that? So we started as a nonprofit in 2008. In 2011, this is when a lot of impact investors were starting to arise. We spun out a for-profit arm of the company so that we could attract more capital. And we thought with both private capital and philanthropic capital, um, we could really scale this more quickly. Now, that was really, really challenging. And as I was living in India and we were figuring this out, we realized the economics of this model didn't really make sense as a for profit because the cost of distribution of this product was so high, right? And the governments were the ones that control most of the healthcare infrastructure in a country like India. So that meant that our whole business was based on government contracts, which is really, really difficult in a country like India yet again. So I guess the short of it is that the economics didn't work. We kept trying to kind of pivot and figure out the business model. Ultimately, we ran out of funding. And so we had an acquisition opportunity and worked on this deal for 6 months, signed all the paperwork. Um, the day the wire transfer was supposed to come, we discovered that this firm, the acquiring firm, was shutting down, which meant that we would not have the money to continue our work. So this was 10 years in. I was beyond burned out. I'd lived in India for 4 of those years and I did not see a path forward. And this is after, everything in between a decade of like ups and downs and trying to save the company and so on. And so my co-founder and I closed down the company. And that's when I bought that ticket to Indonesia because I just needed to get away from everything to find
Mm,
myself again,
mm,
and that's really the moment the journey started. Now, yeah,
mm.
some really interesting serendipitous things that happened like through the course of that journey. So I could talk about that now or later, but but the company
Yeah,
did
let's
eventually.
dive in. Yeah, what were you experiencing? What did you learn from it?
Well, I'll tell two stories and then you could figure out how to edit this and piece this all together. But the night before leaving for Indonesia, maybe it's a couple nights before, I turned on Netflix and I came across a film, a documentary about Tony Robbins. And I didn't know anything about Tony. I thought he was kind of like this infomercial guy. I didn't know anything about him really. And so I watched this film and I was so touched. I was crying beginning to end. And it's about his big event called Date with Destiny. And so at the end of watching, I wrote in my notebook, go to Date with Destiny. And then I forgot about it. About 3 weeks into my trip to Indonesia, I randomly received a phone call from a man named Jonathan who said to me, I work with Tony. He said, Tony found out about Embrace and he'd like to help. He'd like to make an investment and he wants to use your product as an example of social innovation at an upcoming event. And he'd like to invite you to Date with Destiny as his guest. So this was like crazy. It was so serendipitous, like just like seriously, just like out of the blue. And I ended up going. So I tried some things in Indonesia. I ended up going to Tony's event. I ended up going to a few of his events that year actually, and that was like part of what launched me on this healing journey. So through that
Mm,
process, and I ended up taking more than a year off to try, every kind of self-help seminar, but I also did things like psychedelics. I meditated in the Indonesian jungle. I did several silent meditations. I did somatic work, breath work, frog poisoning, all the things. And what did I learn? I learned so much. I mean, I think each teacher, each modality taught me something.
mm,
But probably the most important part of my journey was realizing that everything I was looking for outside had to come from within me.
mm,
And I had this one moment. So I had learned about this therapeutic practice called psychodrama in my
mm,
journey. And it's a form of kind of like group therapy where people in a group, you have play the roles of your family members, right? And so you have people play the role of your family members, and you kind of act out the things that happened, and then you pick different people, participants, to play the roles of your ideal parents. And the idea is to create kind of a more loving, nurturing alternative to what happened.
mhm,
And that can give you kind of an imprint in your body of what that could have felt like. Right? And so I learned about this practice actually through Bessel van der Kolk's retreat at Esalen. And after I learned about it, I became obsessed with finding the ideal father, like obsessed. And so I did multiple psychodramas. I cast different people to be the ideal father. And each time I had them say the words I thought I wanted to hear, like, I love you, you are
mm,
enough, you are worthy. Every what every child wants to hear. But every time I had them say it to me, I would feel nothing. And so in the final scene of the book, I orchestrated this whole psychodrama. I handpicked the ideal father. I hand wrote all the lines that I wanted him to say with me to me. And once again, I felt nothing. And so
mm,
what I did instead was I had this picture of myself as a 5-year old. And I picked up that
mm,
picture and I just said everything I'd ever wanted to hear from an ideal father to myself, right? I said to that little girl, you are worthy, you are enough, and there's nothing you could do that would make me not love you.
mm,
And for the first time, I believed it. I felt it in my body. And I realized that I needed to give that love to myself. That
mm,
no healer or ideal father or partner or even my work, my mission, none of that was going to fill that void. And so that's what I've learned. The biggest takeaway, I mean, there's so many, but the biggest takeaway is when you can have that inner sense of worthiness, when you can give that
mm,
self-love and self-compassion, when you can give that to yourself, that is what true
mhm,
resilience is, right? So for so much of my life, I thought resilience meant pushing harder, pushing through, working more. And now I know it's much more about slowing down
mhm.
and taking the space to truly be kind to ourselves, right? And I think when we have that inner sense of resilience and worthiness that's unshakable, that is what gives you the courage to face anything in life.
Mhm. I love that you said the word courage. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that journey. I very much resonated. I have a very similar
Mm,
moment where I experienced that. That idea of reparenting our inner child
mhm.
and
Yeah.
kind of like stepping in. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Big Asian Energy is officially out, and you can go and pick it up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc. If you've ever felt like there's something stopping you from reaching your full potential, if you've ever felt like you want to have that unstoppable charisma and confidence in the work that you do, as well as just the way you show up in life, this might be the book for you. It is a book that is jam-packed with research studies, advice, case studies, stories, and of course, so many different techniques and takeaways, including communication, as well as mindset, as well as confidence, and all the other topics out there. It just won one of the best books of 2025 on Amazon. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go take a look. And finally, if you have a few seconds, can I also ask you to leave a quick review for Big Asian Energy? It not only means the world to us to hear from you, but more importantly, it does absolutely help us in reaching more audiences. I hope you're having an amazing day, and thanks again. So one of the modalities that I've experienced training in is in IFS. It's called internal family therapy. And there's a lot of work that overlaps with a lot of what you described, which includes somatic work and all these like inner child reparenting. I've done the psychodrama thing. It's very powerful exercises. And essentially the core of it, for those who are listening but are maybe new to the why, I think a lot of times when I talk to people about this, they're kind of like, yeah, but I'm okay. I'm not like sad or depressed. Like, why do I need to go through this? And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's courage. It's clarity. And actually, essentially, we can think of it as like we have our true selves, and our real selves is where all of our best versions of ourselves live. It's the curious, compassionate, it's creative, it's confident, it's all of these great things that, you know, are pre-existing. And the most beautiful thing is that that was there in the beginning. That's like our base programming. It never goes away. That confidence, that such deep power of knowing, it never, ever, ever fades. We just piled all of these various different
Right.
roles on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? And they were all protective, right? Like the voice that says that we're not good enough was
Right.
taught to us to keep us safe, right? The voice that we are, you know, and it could be very extreme, like in some of the extreme cases that I was doing when we were doing studies on, like including people cutting themselves, including people hurting themselves, even killing themselves. And how could
Yes.
that be a protective part? Well,
Yep.
it can be a protective part if the feeling is so big, that's so hard to deal with, that it seems that pain is the only way to stop it. But I think this really comes back too. And I'm really curious, because you've done so many different things that, you know, you talked about like psychedelics and all these kind of various modalities. First and foremost, is there one that you felt played the biggest role in your transformation?
Yes. I think, thank you for mentioning IFS. IFS, internal family systems or parts work, is one of the most helpful tools I have come across, and the thing that I recommend to everybody. And just to back up for a second on the science of this. So, again, coming back to the body keeps the score, things like adversity trauma, that is stored in our limbic brain, in our emotional brain, right? Talk therapy happens at the level of our neocortex, which is our thinking brain, which is why talk therapy in my mind does not is not really helpful for trauma. I mean, you could talk through things, but until you get into the body and into really processing emotions in a deeper way, then I think talk therapy, in all the years I did it, did not do a whole lot for me. Now, internal family systems is one of the practices that really, for me, goes into the somatic work and goes into deeper levels of consciousness. And then, as you said, John, the practice is about, we have all these different parts. We have our protectors. These are the parts that protect us from feeling pain. That might be your perfectionist part, your inner critic, the overachiever. These are all of our protectors, right? I have a warrior part that an ex-boyfriend nicknamed Genghis Khan. And then we have the exile. So these are the parts of us that we had like exiled as we were, especially when we were younger, because it was too much. Those feelings were too much, right? And so these parts carry feelings like shame or fear or rejection. And these managers or protectors come up to protect the exiles from feeling those things. And I think what IFS does is it allows us to really recognize and have awareness of each of these parts of ourselves. And then instead of banishing them or shaming them, allows us to be in relationship with them. Right. And so one of the most useful practices has been meeting my protector parts and meeting them with kindness and asking them, what are you afraid of? And what are you protecting me from? And I really saw exactly what you're saying, that the part that was criticizing myself all the time. I think we are like the meanest to ourselves, right? And that
Always.
inner critic voice that all of us have, that inner critic is protecting us from feeling shame or embarrassment or feeling like we're not enough, right? And so when we can
Mm,
treat that part of ourselves kindly, right? And almost reparent, like you said, that allows us to have a different relationship. And that has
mhm,
been just game changing for me is meeting each of these parts, meeting the hurt inner child, meeting these protective
mhm,
parts, and approaching them from a place of kindness and curiosity so that they're not always
mhm.
at the driver's seat, right? And then that
Yes.
allows you to lead from your true, authentic self. So IFS,
Mhm,
love the practice. Always encourage people to explore it in different forms. I'm coming up with kind of a free framework that's kind of based on IFS for people to download on my website because I just want everyone to have exposure to these practices. So yeah, that was hands down one of the most helpful. I would say psychedelic therapy as well has been really helpful for me in terms of getting into like these deeper levels of consciousness. And
mm,
the one that I ended up um, experimenting or trying the most, I would say that was most impactful was with MDMA. And I think that's a therapy that is used specifically for PTSD. The clinical trials have shown just amazing results in terms of most of the studies have been with veterans. So within 3 sessions, the the studies show that people are able to kind of get off the PTSD scale with MDMA therapy. And in my own experience with it, it's really allowed me to see both myself and others in a far more kind of compassionate way and
mm,
to really kind of allow myself to sit through some very, very difficult things from my childhood, to go back to those memories, but in a safe way. And I think that is the key thing is that
mhm,
when we go back and process and revisit those memories, that we're able to do that in a safe way. And that's often through why I think therapy is really important or coaching. And why me personally, I don't think trauma work can be done through an AI chatbot or through chat gpt, and while that helps with access and can be helpful kind of on a surface level, I really think having a human with you is so critical in the healing process.
mhm. Absolutely. Nothing quite can replace, I would say, the level of empathy and being seen, because really that's what our goal is. And when you're working with an IFS coach or therapist, I mean, that's exactly
Yes.
what it is. It's how do we allow our real self to be met? And it's never just through the therapist, it's always through us, right? That's the actual thing, coming home to
Yes.
ourselves,
Yes.
essentially.
It is, but there's something
Um,
called empathetic resonance too, where it's not just what someone is saying, but it is the way the expressions on their face, right? A
mhm,
pause, silence, the eye contact. There are all these like really small things happening in that exchange with another person that is creating that safe space and allowing you to feel seen and met, right? So that is
mhm,
really my work with Bessel. He's been my therapist over the last couple of years. That's something I really noticed when he slowed down or he took a breath, then I would take a breath and I could slow down. Right. Or when I
mm,
recounted things that I had like disconnected from all my feelings around some pretty tough experiences, he would he would mirror for me what I didn't give myself space to feel. So the look of concern, the look of sadness on his face, then I could slow down and really tune into that for myself.
mhm. Absolutely. I like to quote, this is from one of the last chapters in your book. Where you written down for your journey before going to, I think, an MDMA journey. And it goes, I want to heal my inner child who doesn't feel worthy or beautiful. I want to receive my ideal father's love. I want to find my way home. And there's something about that passage that I remember highlighting, especially the words of, I want to find my way home. Have you found your way home now?
Yeah, I think I have. And I think that's just really, again, coming to see that I am enough as I am,
Mm,
right? After Embrace shut down and sorry, coming to back to complete that story, once I met Tony
Mm,
Robbins and his team and I've told them what happened, they loved our mission so much they did not want it to fail. And so
mm,
they, through Idea Lab, acquired the company. And then in 2021, we actually we turned Embrace back into a nonprofit so that we could give our incubators for free to every baby who needs one. And so the work has really been focused on humanitarian crisis and getting our incubators into some of these really challenging areas. So that,
mm,
was a wonderful ending for Embrace. But before all of that happened, I felt so shattered. I felt like I had failed, this mission that the thing I'd built for 10 years was a failure. So I felt really, really broken. And at that point, I still felt like my achievements were the things that defined me. Right. And so
mm,
going on this journey, even though Embrace did have a happy ending, um, I really learned that I am worth more than the sum of my achievements.
mm,
Right. I am worth more than my title, my work, my company, the number of babies I saved, even. And I think that is my message, my core message to people that you are enough just as you are. You don't
mm,
have to prove your worth, you don't have to earn your worth. And in discovering that, that's what has given me the most freedom. Right. And
mm,
that's finding your way back to yourself when you can rest in that space of wholeness, right? And it's not our external successes or failures or circumstances that dictate who we are, that you just sit in that knowingness of who you are.
mhm,
And I feel that the
mm,
most, I moved to Hawaii last year. I surf every morning. I love being in the ocean. But my ritual is at the end of every session, I lay on my back and I just float. And I feel so at peace because I feel completely held by the ocean. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be anything. I just am. In those moments I feel so much freedom. And it's beautiful. And it's something I will say, it's not like, oh, my life is perfect and I have no more problems. That's not it at all. But I would say I am more capable of handling those ups and downs, and when challenges come about, I can process them more quickly. I would say the inner dialogue in my head has changed a lot. So whereas it used to be so mean to myself, I still hear those voices come up, but now they are replaced by a kinder voice as well that reminds me of all these lessons that I've learned. I'll tell
mm,
you a funny story. I haven't really told this to many people yet, but even in this book process, it's very vulnerable to put out a book. I'm a first time author, and of course, I wanted to do well, right? But when I felt myself kind of getting attached to that and feeling like a little too like achievement oriented about it, I actually with a friend came to Hawaii a week ago, and we had this ritual. I only have one physical copy of the book right now, and I actually threw it in the ocean. And
oh my gosh, why?
to let go, to just let go.
Mm,
And I wrote
mm,
this manifesto for myself at the beginning of this journey that it said something like, trust the waves will take this message to where it needs to go.
mm,
And there's something about, there's, of course, we all want to be goal oriented and strive for things, but there's also this beautiful process of letting go and
mm,
surrendering, right? And that's where real freedom lies, is like, it's like when you can find the balance between those two things. So
mm,
I'm only 3 weeks away from the book launch, but I really wanted to just like surrender. And I've worked so hard and I've put my heart into those pages. And
mm.
we'll see what happens. I also want to just surrender the outcome, and this will be what it's going to
Yeah,
be.
absolutely. I love this. It's just taking a moment, and resetting. I mean, we always, anything we create, we always try to imbue it with the energy of success, right? We want to see it get into more hands. We want to see that New York Times bestseller. We want to see all these things. But the truth is, it'll find its way to the people who need it. And that's really where it is. That time and time again, in my own, just to share my own, like I'm a few months on the other side of the
Yeah,
book
yeah,
launch, and the thing that I still love love, 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 love is whenever I get a message, an email, a text message. This morning I got it from, Facebook Messenger of all places, someone who's just like, I just went through the book and it resonated. There's something that awakens. And it's in those moments that you realize that this was never your book. Like
Yes.
this is not something you created. This was co-facilitated by the experiences, the energies of so many teachers that I've encountered. I'll speak
Yes.
for myself, that I've encountered with the lessons and everything. Like this is I just channel. I'm just here to channel it. Like it can be no ego when you're writing, because that gets in the way of the actual energetics. You try to force it
Yes.
into something. You try to force an outcome out of something. That's never how it works. But releasing it and letting it just be, the energy that it carries,
Oh,
that's what attracts people into it.
yes, I love that you said that, John. And that's how I feel. It's like I have been supported by and had the opportunity to work with so many incredible teachers and healers. And
Mm-hmm.
so their energy is on those pages,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to share, not everyone may have access to all those teachers. So I want to share everything I've learned with everybody else. And what you said is absolutely true. It's like, yeah, that I can co-conspired with all of these people energetically to share a message, and that message is for healing. And so
Mm-hmm.
that is my biggest gift, is like we're still pre-launch, but for people who have read the book so far, when they've come back and said to me, that made me feel less alone, or that made me
Mm-hmm.
see my life differently.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry about that. I actually had this, like, the publisher sent books out to some folks who aren't in my network. And actually, just a day or two ago, read a review someone had written on NetGalley, and she said that after reading my book, she had started to see a therapist. And as she was
Mm-hmm.
writing the review, she had already seen that therapist a couple of times. And I was like, wow, if this can help someone wake up to something or set them off on their own healing journey, then I have already succeeded, and that's truly what success is. It's not about making some list, it's about
Mm-hmm.
touching people and helping people. And that's why I wrote this.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's going to touch a lot of people.
Thank you.
Um, this is something I love asking with authors. It's, what is the hope that you feel like? What do you want people to walk away when they
Yeah.
finish reading your book? When they pick it up, who are they, and who are they when they walk away?
I think it's really comes back to what I said, that you are enough just as you are.
Mm,
And
beautiful.
that is the actually the what is that thing called? The thing that the dedication, is that what it's called? On the and the when you write.
Acknowledgement? No, no, you're talking about the very beginning. Dedication. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Dedication.
dedication.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So the dedication of my book is to the little part in each of us who has ever felt
Mm,
like we weren't enough.
mm,
And what I want to say to everyone is, you are enough, just as you are, And my
mm,
thesis of the world now is, if every child felt safe and loved, our world would look like a totally different place, completely
mm.
different place, right? Because then we don't grow up and feel like we have to act out of fear and control and ego, right? Because we're trying to prove
Absolutely.
things. But when we feel safe and loved, we can then act with kindness and love and compassion and purpose, right? And so that's what I want
Mm,
to dedicate my life to. And I actually
mm,
stepped down from my role from Embrace in May so I could focus on the book and what comes next, and
mm,
what I want to go into. And what I've already been doing the last couple of years is, as similar to you, is leadership coaching, and
beautiful.
really bringing everything I've learned to help other people,
Mm,
and in the long run, and what I've been doing more as a volunteer, is I want to work directly with kids who have trauma. Um,
mm,
that's my vision of a more peaceful and harmonious world. And when I
mm.
say that I want every child to feel safe and loved, that also goes to the inner child in each of us.
I love that. That's beautiful. I would love to hear a little bit more about your work with leadership coaching, because I think a lot of people don't see the or haven't yet seen the relationship between the
Right.
things you're talking about, healing trauma in our childhood, and they
Yeah.
kind of look at it and go, "Wait a second, leadership coaching? Isn't that about like how to lead a team and like go make profit?" Like,
Yeah.
how do those two things connect? How do you see that happening in your world?
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking this. This is so important because you're right. It's not immediately obvious from the story, but here's what I've discovered. So, we talk so much in leadership about things like psychological safety, right? Psychological
Hmm.
safety is the number one most important determinant of the highest functioning teams, the most innovative teams, and it's what allows people to come to work and bring their whole selves, to speak up and take risks without fear of being shut down or fear of failure. Well, here's my question. How, as a leader, do you create psychological safety for others if you don't have that within yourself? Right. And I think the more inner work we do as leaders, the more self aware we are, we bring that energy to our whole team. And that's what I've seen through
Mm.
the healing process, right? Is that the things we face, whether you want to call it trauma or adversity, all of us have faced adversity and challenges. All of us have wounding, right? So, how do we make sure we're not bringing that into our work? Because those things can often affect the way we lead, the way we build our cultures, the way we build our teams. And the key
Hmm.
to that is investing in this inner work. So I was
Mm.
trained under the conscious leadership group, and some of the things I teach in my leadership practice are things like, how do we feel all of our feelings? Why is that important? What's the science of that? And why is that important as a leader? Right?
Mm.
There's so much wisdom in our feelings, that what is coming from our heart, what's coming from our gut, our intuition, right? It's not just about our thinking brain. So how do we tap into that wisdom as a leader to help us make better decisions? How do we tap into what is a whole body yes, right? What are the things that are in alignment with who we are to help us again make better decisions about the opportunities to say yes to or no to, right?
Mm.
How do we think about our challenges as allies? How do we really acknowledge, is it Byron Katie or Katie Byron? I always get her. But anyways, like seeing the opposite of our stories, being willing to challenge our own stories. And it's like when we do all of these things, then when we can lead from a place of curiosity and openness rather than fear and self-righteousness, or like needing to be right in our views all the time. When we do that, that is truly what allows us to create thriving teams,
Hmm.
organizations, businesses. So these things
Hmm.
are directly linked in my mind.
I completely agree. 100%. And incidentally, it is Byron Katie. It's a little bit confusing. I've made that. I'm like, wait, is it Byron Katie or Katie Byron?
You have to cut that
Who is
part
the
out. I'm
author
like, oh, yeah,
of
yeah, I forget.
who is the author of the work, right?
Yes.
But exactly as you said, I mean, like when we're talking about it, really at the very, very core of it is self leadership, right?
Yes.
How do we actually have leadership over ourselves when we don't have our guards up, when we're not quickly, constantly, without being aware of it, scanning for threats, and therefore not actually being present to the people that we're here to lead or the people that we're around. It doesn't matter if
Yes.
you're dealing with clients, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with teams, because at the core of it is, are we present for it? And
Yes.
that presence, that clarity, that groundedness really comes from identifying all the other noisy voices that we have in our own body, right? Imagine being
Yes.
in a room and you're trying to lead a whole team, and sitting behind you with 30 people who are throwing comments and yelling, and one is crying and one is judging and the one is saying you're being too, loud, and the other one is you're not being loud enough. How can we truly lead? Well, we
Yes.
have that internally oftentimes as we carry it through our own lives. And when we can clear it and we can come back to that self leadership, that's when we become more effective as a leader.
Yeah, and I'll just share one. I know we only have a few minutes, but I'll just share one quick anecdote, which is, in my years in India working on Embrace as a first time CEO, my vision of leadership was that I had to be so composed and buttoned up and have it all together, But the issue we were working on was inherently so challenging and so emotional. And so I remember one day I was so overwhelmed, I started crying in a team meeting. And
Mm.
afterwards, I was mortified. I was so embarrassed because I didn't let emotion show usually. But I remember afterwards, my head of operations came to me and he said, "Thank you so much for being vulnerable. Because when you're
Mm.
vulnerable, it gives us permission to be vulnerable as well." And he went on to tell me how exhausted everyone was, and all of us were working around the clock. But because I, you know, held such airtight composure, everyone else felt like they had to do the same, right? And so it
Mm,
really woke me up to the fact that great leadership is about authenticity, which
mhm,
requires that we be vulnerable, which requires that we be in tune with ourselves and how we feel, right?
mm,
And so I think the way we treat ourselves becomes the basis, the foundation for the way we treat others. And that's why it's even more imperative to do that in our work.
mm. I love that. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing all of your experiences and knowledge and wisdom. How do our listeners find out more about you and your book? And if they're interested in checking it out, how to follow up?
Yeah, so you can check me out on my website. It's janemariechen.com. The book is called Like a Wave We Break. It's published by Penguin Random House, and it's available at all book retailers. It comes out October 14th. And yeah, I hope you enjoy reading it.
Amazing. And just to throw that in there, for those who want to work with you as a leadership coach, how do they find information about that? Is it also through your website?
Yes, you can reach out to me on my website. There's a contact form there, and I'm so excited to be doing more of this work. It's just, I love it so much. So, thank you for bringing that up, John. But yes, you can find me and contact me through my website, janemariechen.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much once again for your time. And for all listeners, once again, if there's something that you've heard today in Jane's story, in the lessons that she shared in the work, please remember to send it to a person that you care about. It doesn't matter if you're sending this as a whole episode or just a clip or whatever it is. Remember, when we rise together. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.